My name is Althea Rook, 71 years old, retired ethics attorney. Savannah, born and raised. People used to call me the iron dove, soft-spoken but unyielding when the truth was on trial. These days, I live quietly by the marsh, feeding the herons that wander near my porch. I thought my courtroom days were behind me. The marble steps of the Savannah-Chatham County Courthouse were slick with rain that morning, a gray sheen like tarnished silver. I climbed them slowly, careful with my cane, the weight of my old leather briefcase pulling at my arm. The same briefcase I'd carried through 20 years of hearings. It still smelled faintly of tobacco and law books. Inside, the air was cool and humming with whispers. Lawyers shuffled papers. Heels clicked on the tile, and somewhere a bailiff cleared his throat. Then, as I pushed open the door to courtroom B, everything went still. Judge Peregrine Holt sat high above the bench, a man known for his steady tone and his impatience with drama. When his eyes met mine, his composure faltered. The gavel paused midair. "Ms. Rook." His voice wavered. "Why are you here?" The words struck through the silence. I felt dozens of eyes turned toward me, faces expectant, puzzled. And there, at the plaintiff's table, sat my daughter Vera Loxley, her posture rigid in a slate-gray suit. At her side, Attorney Quinby Slate offered a thin, rehearsed smile. For a long moment, Vara and I just looked at each other. She had my eyes sharp, deliberate, but hers no longer held warmth. On the table in front of her lay a file-stamped guardianship petition in bold black letters. I set my briefcase on the defense table and unlatched the clasp. The click echoed through the room like a small act of defiance. Judge Holt cleared his throat. "Ms. Rook, your daughter is requesting legal authority over your estate and medical decisions. Are you here to respond to that petition?" "Yes, Your Honor," I said. "Steady. I'm here to defend my own mind." Outside, the rain eased into sunlight. Inside, the court recorder began to type, each stroke marking the start of something I never thought I'd face again, the fight for my name, and for the life I had built with my own hands. A week before that morning in court, I was standing by the kitchen window, watching the tide crawl over the marsh grass, when the mail carrier knocked. He held out a thick envelope stamped "Certified, Return Receipt Required," the kind that always carries bad news. I signed for it, my hand trembling slightly. Inside were documents I hadn't seen in years. Notice of guardianship petition, filed by Vara Loxley, my only child. My eyes traced the lines like they were written in a foreign language, but the meaning was clear enough. She was asking the court to strip me of my rights, to place my finances and medical care under her control. The petition cited an old power of attorney I'd signed after hip surgery 2 years earlier. It was supposed to be temporary, just until I healed. Vara had promised she'd tear it up once I was back on my feet. I remembered her standing by my hospital bed then, saying softly, "It's just paperwork. Mom, I'll give it back when you're stronger." Now, those same papers were her weapon. I turned page after page, finding attached copies of bank statements, real estate listings, even an unsigned contract to sell my Marshside cottage, the home my husband and I built after he retired from the Navy. My throat burned. That evening, Maven Price, my neighbor from 3 doors down, stopped by when she saw the porch light still on. She'd once been a paralegal for the city. I handed her the documents without a word. She scanned them quickly, her jaw tightening. "She's filed for full guardianship," she said quietly. "That's not just control, Althea. That's erasure." We sat at the kitchen table until the cicadas fell silent. Maven reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Don't let her do this to you. You know the system better than anyone." When she left, I went to the hall closet and pulled down my old briefcase, the one I hadn't touched in a decade. A thin layer of dust rose as I opened it. Inside, neatly folded beneath faded legal pads, was my law license expired, but still gleaming under the lamplight. I ran a finger over the embossed seal, breathing deeply. Tomorrow, I would call the clerk's office myself. I wasn't ready to surrender. Not my home, not my name, and certainly not my mind. After I called the clerk's office and confirmed the petition was real, I sat alone in my kitchen, listening to the slow hum of the refrigerator and the faint crackle of the marsh wind against the windows. It had been years since I'd truly thought about how Vara and I had come to this point. Maybe I should have seen it long before the letter arrived, when my husband, Grant, passed away. Vara was 30. She'd flown home from Atlanta and stayed for months, sleeping in her old room, keeping the house full of light. She cooked for me, organized my files, even drove me to court when I handled small pro bono cases for veterans. "You make it look so easy, Mom," she used to say, her eyes shining with admiration. For a while, I believed our bond was unbreakable. We'd survived grief together, and I thought that meant we understood each other. But admiration can curdle into pressure. When Vara launched her tech startup, I was her first investor. I withdrew nearly all of my retirement savings, everything Grant and I had planned for quiet years by the coast. I told myself it was faith in my daughter's brilliance. In truth, it was my way of staying needed. The company folded 18 months later. She called one night, her voice flat and hollow. "It's all gone, Mom." I remember the pause that followed, too long, too quiet. I'd meant to say, "It's only money," but what came out was a sigh that sounded like disappointment. After that, her visits became shorter, her tone sharper. "The last time we argued," she said, "you never forgave me for failing. Mother, you just turned it into proof you were right." Then she hung up before I could answer. Now, holding those legal papers, I realized how my own perfection had pushed her away, how my silence had built the same wall I accused her of building. Still, somewhere beneath the hurt, I kept hoping that love might find its way back through the cracks, even if the bridge between us had already started to crumble. 2 days after the letter arrived, I sat at my desk surrounded by folders and old bank statements, the same oak desk Grant once used for his tide charts. I had spent the morning tracing every page of my financial history. Most of it was in order, except for one signature, then another, my own initials, curling the wrong way, written with the hesitation of a stranger. On the 3rd page, a transfer authorization bore a date I knew I'd been in Charleston for a legal seminar. Beneath it, a faint watermark from South Shore Realty caught my eye. A listing attachment followed my cottage on Marshfield Road, marked "Preliminary Offer Pending." The breath left my chest. I had never listed my home. That afternoon, I drove into Savannah, parking near a faded brick building on Oglethorpe Avenue. The brass plate beside the door still read Rex Dorian, Forensic Accounting Services. Years ago, I'd mentored Rex when he was a nervous intern, poring over embezzlement ledgers. Now his hair was grayer, his eyes calmer, the sort of man who had seen too many truths disguised as paperwork. He listened carefully as I spread the documents across his desk. "Your daughter's name doesn't appear directly," he murmured, scrolling through his computer. "But these transfers route through a shell Vera Consulting, LLC, registered to an address in Atlanta." I felt my jaw tighten. She didn't even bother to hide behind someone else's name. Rex printed a summary report and leaned back. "You'll need medical clarity, too. Althea. They'll question your competence before they face your evidence." That night, I called Dr. Calder-Wynn, an old courtroom colleague turned geriatric psychiatrist. He agreed to see me the next morning at his small office near Forsyth Park. The evaluation was thorough reflexes, recall tests, even clock drawings I hadn't done since law school psych electives. When he finished, he smiled faintly. "You're sharper than most of my residents. I'll file the report myself." Scores 29 out of 30. As I was leaving, a young clerk from Judge Holt's office passed me in the hallway. She lowered her voice. "Ms. Rook, they're preparing to challenge your results. Just be ready." Outside, the magnolia trees were in bloom. Petals heavy and white, but the air felt colder than winter. I walked to my car with the report pressed against my chest, the proof of my mind and the evidence that my own daughter was trying to erase it. The courtroom smelled faintly of lemon polish and damp wool. It was the first day of the hearing, and the benches were already full. Reporters weren't allowed. But Savannah is a small city. Word travels faster than filings. When I entered, I caught sight of Vara sitting beside Quinby Slate, her expression composed, every gesture rehearsed. She wore pale blue, a color that used to flatter innocence. Quinby rose as soon as Judge Holt signaled. "Your Honor," he began smoothly, "we submit evidence of cognitive decline medical assessments dating back 18 months. My client has grave concerns regarding her mother's capacity to manage financial and legal matters." He flipped through a binder thick with outdated clinic forms, his voice honeyed with false concern. Judge Holt scanned the pages, brow furrowed. "These records predate the most recent evaluation." Quinby smiled faintly. "They establish a pattern, Your Honor." A few people in the gallery murmured. Vara didn't look at me. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap. I had seen that same pose when she was 10, waiting for me to discipline her after she broke a neighbor's window. Fear and pride, holding hands. When Holt nodded in my direction, I stood. My legs felt steady, anchored by decades of courtroom floorboards under my shoes. "With the court's permission," I said, "I'd like to file 2 documents for the record notice of revocation of power of attorney and a current competency evaluation conducted by Dr. Calder Wynne, dated this week." The bailiff carried them forward. Paper whispered across wood as they reached the bench. Holt adjusted his glasses. Score 29 out of 30. He read quietly. I met Vara's eyes for the first time. She blinked, a flicker of uncertainty behind her calm. Quinby's smile tightened. "Your Honor, with respect, reports can be bought. Familiar names carry weight in this courthouse. I trust the court will scrutinize any claims of perfection." The remark hung like smoke. Holt's gavel tapped once a warning, but his eyes lingered on me longer than before. Recognition tugging at something half-remembered. I closed my briefcase and sat down slowly. The trap had been laid. Yes, but not by me. For the first time, I felt the weight of every word being recorded, every lie growing teeth in the silence. The morning after court, I found Rex Dorian waiting on my porch. His car still ticking from the drive out to the marsh. He held a manila envelope under his arm and looked graver than I'd ever seen him. "I think I've got what you need," he said quietly. Inside, over coffee, he spread the contents across the table, printouts of bank transfers, realtor commission drafts, and email chains that stitched together every thread of deceit. One file stopped me cold, Vera Consulting, LLC, linked to deposits from the same escrow account used in the attempted sale of my house. Rex hesitated before sliding a small USB drive toward me. "And there's this," he said, "a voicemail recording between Quinby and your daughter. He's coaching her, telling her to emphasize your forgetfulness, make it sound medical." The blood in my ears roared. I sat back, unable to breathe for a moment. "How did you get it?" She left her phone connected to a shared account, Rex said. "The backup synced automatically. It's authentic." I turned the small drive in my hand. "In Georgia, Recordings were a dangerous weapon, useful only if one party consented, and I hadn't been there. If I use this, I could be the one they accuse, I murmured. From the window, I saw Maven Price crossing the lawn, her shawl fluttering in the wind. When she stepped inside, Rex nodded to her and gathered the papers. Maven listened without interruption, then spoke in her firm, measured way. "You don't play that unless you're cornered," she said. "Not to humiliate them, Althea, only to stop the bleeding. Think of Sarah, not Vara. Sarah, my granddaughter, 17, kind-eyed, caught between love and loyalty. I hadn't seen her in months. The thought of her sitting in that courtroom, watching her mother unravel it, hollowed me. I gathered the papers, slid the drive into my briefcase, and fastened the brass clasp. "Justice is never revenge," I said quietly. "It's restraint with proof." Rex nodded, relief softening his face. As he left, the tide was rising, the marsh shimmering gold in the late light. I stood by the window, feeling the truth heavy in my hand, an invisible wire stretched between lies, ready to snap if pulled too hard. By the third day of the hearing, the air in courtroom B was dense with fatigue and perfume. Vara took the stand with a tissue folded neatly in her hand. Quinby Slate stood beside her, radiating confidence. The two had rehearsed this every pause, every tremor. "My mother's memory isn't what it used to be," Vara began, voice fragile enough to sway the untrained ear. "She forgets appointments, repeats questions, sometimes confuses numbers. I only wanted to help her manage things before she got hurt." Quinby nodded approvingly. "And did you ever take money from your mother's accounts without permission?" "Never," she said quickly, dabbing her eye. "I acted out of love." I watched from the table, my hands folded, the same stillness I used to hold before a closing argument. When my turn came, Judge Holt's eyes met mine. "You may proceed, Ms. Rook." I stood and approached the witness box. Vara's perfume was the same gardenia I'd given her on her wedding day. She couldn't quite meet my gaze. "Vara," I said, "do you recall signing documents to create Vara Consulting, LLC? Her jaw tightened. "That was for freelance work." I placed Rex's report on the evidence table. "And were those clients real, or were they the escrow accounts from my property sale?" A ripple passed through the room. Quinby objected, citing relevance. Holt overruled. "Next." I lifted the notarized power of attorney creased, annotated, dated. "This form expired 23 months ago. You told the court it remained active. Would you like to explain the inconsistency?" Her breath hitched. Quinby rose again, but his objection died when Judge Holt's hand slammed the gavel. "Counselor." "Sit down," I continued, voice steady. "You also transferred funds from my account to pay for marketing services. Do you recognize this invoice I slid forward, the printed email chain, Quinby's firm letterhead visible? And this signature? Mr. Slate, your own." Quinby paled. "That's absurd. Professional ethics rule 1.15 requires transparent handling of client assets," I said quietly. "You breached it." The courtroom hushed. Holt leaned back, expression unreadable. I reached into my briefcase and withdrew the small USB drive, placing it on the table between us. "Play it if you must," I said, "but understand what silence has already cost me." For a long moment, no one moved. Vara's hand trembled. Her tears no longer looked rehearsed. She turned toward me, mouth opening, closing no words, only the recognition of how far we had both fallen. The gavel struck once more. In that sharp sound, something inside me broke free, not victory, not relief, but the heavy truth finally spoken aloud. The final morning of the hearing began in a hush so complete that even the ceiling fans seemed to slow. I stood near the defense table, hands folded, While Judge Holt shuffled through his papers with deliberate care, Vera sat across from me, her lawyer staring down at his notes as if they might rearrange themselves into salvation. The scent of damp oak and dust filled the air, the smell of old justice waiting to be spoken. When Holt finally looked up, his voice was measured, but it carried the weight of a gavel before it ever struck. This court denies the petition for guardianship. The evidence presented fails to establish incompetence. He paused, letting the words land. The power of attorney is void. All property and assets are to be returned to Ms. Althea Rook. A ripple of whispers swept through the courtroom. Someone gasped. Quinby Slate's pen rolled off the table and clattered against the floor. Judge Holt continued, the lines around his mouth deepening. As to Mr. Slate, this court refers the matter to the Georgia State Bar for investigation under Rule 1.15 regarding fiduciary misconduct. The bailiff noted it for the record. Quinby's face blanched to paper. Holt's gaze shifted to Vera. Ms. Loxley. The court orders restitution for unauthorized transfers. You will also complete a course of family counseling before any request for visitation or renewed estate authority may be considered. Vara didn't look up. Her hands trembled slightly in her lap. The edges of a tissue shredded between her fingers. I felt no triumph, only a tired kind of stillness, the kind that follows long storms. Justice had come, yes, but not as victory. It came as correction. When the gavel struck, the sound echoed through my ribs. People began to rise, murmuring, their eyes sliding toward me with cautious respect. I moved slowly to where Vara sat. She flinched as I approached, as though expecting reproach. I stopped beside her, close enough to smell the faint trace of gardenia. You're not my enemy, I said softly, but you made yourself a stranger. For a moment, her lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. The silence between us felt heavier than any verdict. Outside, through the courthouse windows, the clouds broke at last, a shaft of sunlight spilling across the polished floor. The world went on. Indifferent, but fair. The sun rose over the Savannah marsh, slow and golden, pulling the mist apart, thread by thread. Weeks had passed since the ruling, and for the first time in years, the cottage no longer felt like a battleground. The air smelled of salt and damp cedar. I stood by the front door with a small hammer, fixing a brass hook into the frame. The engraving caught the new light. Home by consent only. The phrase had come to me one sleepless night, a truth distilled from everything I'd lost and everything I'd reclaimed. Home wasn't inheritance. It was permission given, earned, and protected. By mid-morning, the table on the porch was set for tea. Maven Price arrived first, her stride brisk and her smile tired but kind. Rex Dorian followed with a jar of honey and a paper bag of warm scones. Dr. Calder Wynne, still in his rumpled linen coat, brought a small bouquet of camellias. We sat together, overlooking the marsh. Cups steaming. Conversation easy and unhurried. Maven raised her cup toward me. You look like someone who's found her footing again. I smiled faintly. Maybe I've just stopped mistaking forgiveness for surrender. Rex chuckled softly. That's one for the record books. The laughter lingered, gentle and clean. Even the wind seemed to listen. When the others left, the house fell back into its quiet rhythm. I gathered the cups, carried them to the sink, and noticed the envelope resting on the windowsill. My name was written in Vara's looping hand, tentative, hesitant, as if afraid of its own arrival. Her letter was short. I don't expect you to forget, but I hope someday you can remember me for something other than what I did wrong. I sat at my desk for a long time before replying. Love built me. Boundaries keep me standing. I sealed it and placed it in the outgoing mail, feeling no bitterness, only the small ache of truth finding its place. Before dusk, I lifted my old leather briefcase from beside the chair and set it on the top shelf. The brass clasp caught the fading light, a quiet echo of closure. Outside, church bells drifted across the water. Soft, steady, and certain, the sound filled the cottage like breath.